And they say, well, the Old Testament is God dealing with the Jews. And they call Abraham a Jew. And they call David a Jew. And they call Solomon a Jew, when they were, in fact, Israelites and Hebrews. But we'll not get off on that. But they just do away with a whole portion of the Bible. Well, they also do the same thing with history. If you read my book called Terrible Terror Stories, there's a story in there about the book thief and how he was stealing our history. The greatest crime of the century is what the FBI called it. No one's ever heard of it. But in there, you'll find out there was a reason they were stealing history. And they have stolen history right out of your mind. They have cut it out of your mind, and you don't even know it. Most of you out there think, and I did this out in Houston when I was preaching there this weekend, I said, who was the first president of the United States? And most everyone says George Washington. Sorry. Wrong. What do you mean it's wrong? It's just not true. It's not true history. The history of this country is that our country was born in 1776. Washington took office, George Washington took office in 1789. What happened in the 13 years in between? I'll tell you what happened. 8 different presidents happened. And the first president was John Hanson. But don't try to find him in the average encyclopedia because they don't even mention him. Why? Because those that God, through His Son, told us are the sons of the devil that come to steal, kill, and destroy, have stolen right in your own lifetime. This country is a little over 200 years old. They've stolen 13 years out of this country. History that no one knows about. Most do not know that when this country was formed, they understood themselves to be Israel. I read from a history book, The Light and the Glory, page 267, about 1773. It says, in like spirit, the new year of 1773 was rung in by the men of Marlborough. Death, they proclaim unanimously on the 1st of January, is more eligible than slavery. A freeborn people are not required by the religion of Jesus Christ to submit to tyranny. Whoa, what kind of religion, what kind of Christianity did they have back then? They said that a freeborn people are not required by the religion of Jesus Christ to submit to tyranny. We have tyranny in this land today. But they may make use of such power as God has given them to recover and support their laws and liberty. We implore the rulers above the skies that He would make bare His arm in defense of His church and people and let Israel go. They saw themselves as Israel. Now, we will not get into that message, but you know I have a book called The Greatest Discovery of Our Age. And I think we'll pull it up on the screen here in a moment. Maybe not. We'll bring it back here in a moment. But anyway, The Greatest Discovery of the Age is the first book I wrote after I discovered that America was the land that was born in a day, you see. And that history that was going on then, I want to read from the same history book. It says, but most crown-appointed governors remain submitted to their king. And one wrote to the Board of Trade in England, if you ask an American who is his master, he will tell you he has none, nor any governor but Jesus Christ, which may have given rise to the cry which was soon passed up and down the length of America by the Committee of Correspondence, no king but King Jesus. Now that's the true history of our country. That's where the foundation of our country is at. Woe to those that serve another God and another system now, and they spy upon Christians who still stand on that foundational truth. Woe. When the Declaration of Independence was signed, it says in the history book, quote, as the news of the Declaration spread abroad in the newborn nation, Americans everywhere were delirious with joy. Cheering, waving, ringing church bells, wasting gunpowder. Samuel Adams, who was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, Samuel Adams wrote, the people, I am told, recognize the resolution as though it were a decree promulgated from heaven, end of quote. They, at that time, that part of the history, they at that time, what time was it? It was July 4th, 1776, that this nation was born. They saw it as a fulfillment of prophecy. And it was the fulfillment of the prophecy we read about in Isaiah 66. Now, on page 34 and 35 of our book called The Greatest Discovery of the Age, and you can order that by writing to us. Just ask for the book, The Greatest Discovery of the Age, at Scriptures for America, Post Office Box 766, LaPorte, Colorado, 80535. I show on page 34 and 35 the calculations. In Leviticus chapter 26, verse 18 and 19, it speaks of a 7 times punishment. God said, now if you don't mind, you don't obey my law, you will be punished 7 times. When you understand true history of the Old Testament, I took Old Testament history in Bible college, but it was misnamed. Really should have been just called Old Testament stories. I learned the stories about Abraham offering up his son Isaac and about Moses coming out of Egypt, but they were just Old Testament stories and there was no connection to it. I didn't understand that I was reading about the history of the Hebrews, the Israelites who, according to the promise God had made, were destined to form a multitude of nations and then in the latter day form a great nation. Well, what happened is they split off and they formed 2 nations right after the death of Solomon, and you had the 10 northern tribes called the house of Israel. And you had the 2 southern tribes called the house of Judah. Eventually, the people from the house of Judah became known as the Judaites, or Jews. But what about the house of Israel? Hosea was the prophet that God sent to the house of Israel. And he said, if you don't repent, you will perish. Talking about the fact that they were going to perish as a nation. And they did, because they did not repent. And when they perished, they were conquered by the Assyrians, and they were hauled off into Assyrian captivity. And it took about 25 years for that whole deportation to take place. But I point out in the book here, it says the conquest of the house of Israel took 25 years to complete. As near as can be determined, the first campaign against Israel began in 745 A.D., Now, the 7 time periods of punishment that Leviticus 26 verses 18 and 19 talk about, I show on page 34 and 35 that the Bible teaches us that it comes out to be 2,520 years. I could, if I wanted to take time, we could go through the calculations, but I'm offering you a book. If you just take time and write for it, you can read about it and do the own calculations, read the scriptures. But when you add that 2,520 years to 745, guess what year it comes out to be? 1776. And on July 4th, 1776, there was in fact a nation born in a day. Now, let me tell you what I did last Sunday. As I already told you, I went to church, something I very seldom do. What happened, and I want to correct an error, or I shouldn't say an error. I want to correct a statement because I made a very dishonoring statement towards my father. Last Sunday was Mother's Day, and I made a remark that my father was my mother and father. That's the way I was raised. And I said on every Sunday, at least it was in the good weather, every Sunday he made sure that I was not in church. I was at a horse show. As I reflected on that going home to the radio ranch last Sunday, I thought, that's dishonoring my father. I thank God that he did not have me in church every Sunday. Because if he'd had this boy in church every Sunday, you wouldn't have the kind of preacher you got today. My father was a man. He was a man's man, and he was a man of integrity. If you want to know where I get some of my preaching ability,